Hello my dear YouTuber friends, and I hope you're all keeping well. Welcome to this new video, which is a newbie guide, or a new player guide, to using the Autopilot. Now I've covered Autopilot guides in other videos I've made in the past, but there's still some people who get a little bit confused with the Autopilot and need a bit of help. Maybe you're a returning player, maybe Flight Simulator 2020 is your first flight simulator, and you just need a bit more of a helping hand when it comes to the Autopilot. So this is a complete newbie guide. I'm going to go over a couple of steps, very basic Autopilot steps, and what they do and how to use it. So let's get on with this video. Okay, so if you want to follow my guide step by step, ensure that you're flying in an appropriate aircraft like the Cessna 172 that I've got here. That's got an autopilot function. Let's jump inside. I'll go down to these G1000 screens. These do lots of wonderful little things, including autopilot capabilities, as you can see here. So fly an appropriate aircraft. In fact, just fly the 172 with the G1000s if you're going to follow this video step by step. And also take off from a runway that doesn't have many tall buildings when you take off, because when you come down to set your autopilot, you don't want to be flying into a skyscraper. And just get something out of the way here, I've got a setting on my Logitech Flight Yacht system which lets me go down. I'm actually flicking my hat switch down to look at my instruments. I can go left and right to look at all my instruments. I'll link one of the videos I did there. If you don't have a switch set up for that, use your right mouse and you can just zoom into the G1000 like that. But like I said, I've got a switch, so I'm going to be using that. Let's talk about the basic autopilot functions. Like I said, I'm only going to go over a couple of the most commonly used autopilot functions in this video, because I'm going to try and make it entirely newbie friendly. Let's first talk about the master autopilot switch. Think of this as turning on a computer, which it effectively is. If you click autopilot, I can engage it here. You can see now my autopilot is on. Nothing else will happen, because basically you're just flicking a switch telling the autopilot to turn on, but you've not inputted any further instructions for the autopilot to follow, so nothing else will follow. So like I said, just think of that as switching on the main computer, and it effectively is. That's just turning on or enabling your autopilot. You have to do a little bit more to instruct the autopilot to do certain things. Let's turn it off now because I'm on the ground, and it's not a good habit to have your autopilot engaged while you're on the ground. You want to be manually taking off. Let's talk about a couple of the most commonly used functions in autopilot. One of them is certainly heading. Now if you were to switch your autopilot on, switch the computer on, and select heading mode, the autopilot will follow whatever heading you have inputted. In this case here, this blue number, which is 360 degrees, which is set by default by the autopilot. This blue marker here shows where the autopilot will turn if you select heading. To alter that number, use the knob. In this case the knob is here, HDG, that's your heading knob. Mouse over it, and mouse up or down. I'll mouse down. Say if I wanted to set the autopilot, I can go a little bit quicker with that as well, to fly 180 on a heading of 180 degrees, which is due south. Then I've set that there now, 180 degrees. So if I was up in the air and I set the autopilot and heading switch on, the autopilot will turn to the left to follow that 180-degree heading. Get in the habit of when you're on the ground or before you engage your autopilot, get in the habit of left clicking that heading knob. I'll do it now, I'll left click. And that will set your autopilot heading to your current heading, which is 259. Get in the habit of doing that, because if you have your autopilot set down here and you turn it on and suddenly your aircraft veers left or right violently, the autopilot's doing that to follow your autopilot heading, and it's just good habit to have your heading set on your current to have your heading set on your current heading. So that's how you would change your heading. I'll come back to that once we're up in the air, but that's quite straightforward. The altitude, the ALT, turn altitude mode off or on in this case. This is a little bit more complex. This is your instruction. This number here on this specific aircraft is your instruction to tell the autopilot what height you would like it to climb to. By default, it's set to 0. This knob down here will increase or decrease that number. The inner knob, so this part here, the inner circle, will increase it. I'll mouse up by increments of 1,000 feet. So I can mouse down, take it back to 0. The outer knob will increase your altitude, your autopilot altitude, by increments of 100. So there you go, I'm mousing up, and I'll mouse back down, I'll put it back down to 0. There's a little bit more to the altitude. You can't just set an altitude. So if I was up in the air and I set an altitude of 2,000 feet and press altitude after pressing the autopilot master on, press the altitude button, it wouldn't necessarily go to that altitude. You have to do a little bit more, which is your vertical speed. So after you press altitude, you then have, there's a couple of ways of doing this, but I'll show you the most common way, or the simple way. You would click your vertical speed mode on. I can do it now, it doesn't really matter. And then you would press one of these two buttons, in this case it's here, one of these two, increase or decrease vertical speed. So if I wanted to climb, I would increase my vertical speed, press that button, and you can see a number here, that's your vertical speed value. So if I left it there, it would climb by 100 feet per minute to that 2,000 altitude. You can increase that. Typically you would set a vertical speed of 300 to 500 feet per minute, and the autopilot will climb on that vertical speed of 300 feet per minute in this case, until it reached the designated altitude, which is 2,000. It's a little bit more complex. I won't do any more in this part of the video, just to keep it simple. A little bit complex, but once you get used to it, it's not actually that complex. Let's put the altitude back to 0 and turn vertical speed mode off. What we'll do, we'll get up in the air and I'll show you this in practice. Okay, so what we're going to do is go full throttle, release the parking brake. I've got live weather on. It's looking very beautiful and very accurate to what I'm seeing as well. Lovely clouds. And I'm at the default runway on Gatwick Airport. If you go to the world map, just say depart here from Gatwick. I think it's runway 26 right or something. And when we get to, we can take off now, pull back gently on my yoke. And I'm going to configure the aircraft, just throttle down a little bit so we don't over throttle. Configure the aircraft to first level flight in a slight climb. It's not quite straight and level, it's just level wings, flying straight ahead. In a slight climb. Just ensure all my trim settings are correct there. Like so. That seems fine. I'm going to go down to my G1000 screen. I'm going to click Autopilot. turn the computer on, and heading. Turn that on. You'll see the aircraft is turning to the left there, the autopilot's turning to the left, to get us back on that heading of 259, which we set before. That was our heading on the runway. So the autopilot's getting us in there. Let's now set our altitude heading. I'll come back to the heading mode in a moment and show you some fun stuff we can do there. Be careful, don't just click altitude here, turn altitude, hold on, because it will try and take you to that altitude of 0 and crash you into the ground. First, set an altitude heading on your autopilot, altitude number on your autopilot, which is higher than your current altitude. So I'm using that knob, you remember that from before. Let's set it at 2000. Now you can see the autopilot's not climbing to 2000 feet, which we set, because we've not told it how we want it to get there. Remember before I spoke about vertical speed? You've got to instruct the autopilot at what vertical speed you would like it to climb at. So click the vertical speed, turn vertical speed mode on. I'm going to go increase vertical speed because we're climbing. Let's say by 300 feet per minute. So you can see the 300 there, you can see the 300 here on this marker. It's climbing us to 300 by 300 feet per minute to an altitude of 2000, which we input. I could change that altitude if I want to. I could say take us to 3000 feet. Why not? Gives us a bit of wriggle room so we can mess around. Because we've got the heading mode turned on and altitude mode on, we can do some fun stuff. I want the autopilot now to turn us to the east, which would be 90. So I'm going to mouse up on this heading knob. I'm going to do it quick as well. You can do this with speed and tell the autopilot to turn us roughly 90. It doesn't have to be 90 bang. Oh, why not? 90. The autopilot's taking us there. I've changed my mind. I want the autopilot. I want to give it a hard time. I'm mousing down to take us to a heading of, I don't know, 181. The autopilot's screaming at me now. It's now turning again. Let's change that again. Let's really mess this autopilot up. I'm going to tell it to go to a heading of 300. Now it's screaming at me. 321. So the autopilot will swing around again to try and follow your instructions. You could do lots of fun stuff with that. You see something of interest ahead of you there. You tell the autopilot, I want to fly to that. So I'm going to change it now to, let's say by 250 degrees heading, to fly us to that interesting thing I saw in the distance. I haven't, it's just an example, so there you go. The autopilot's turning again now to try and get us back to that heading of 50 degrees or so. With the altitude you can do some fun stuff as well. I want to climb back down to 1000, so I'm going to set it to 1000. Wait for that vertical speed to lessen naturally, doesn't matter. Turn vertical, decrease my vertical speed. And you see that number changed there by minus 200 feet per minute. So now the autopilot's descending us to that 1000 feet altitude. So there's lots of fun stuff. Once you have the autopilot turned on, you can start messing about with it. I'm going to actually mess around with it again and tell it to climb back to 300 feet. And I'm going to increase the vertical speed by plus 300 feet per minute. So now it's climbing us back up. I'm going to change my heading again. As you can see, this is just, so while it's climbing or descending, you could do lots of fun stuff with that. Those are very basic autopilot functions. There's one more I want to show you, which a lot of people want to know about, which is the NAV button. Let's first take you to the flight planning stage. So, okay, I'm on the world map from the main menu. I've basically gone to the main menu and selected world map. Let's go down to Gatwick Airport, which is where we want. I want to fly from Gatwick Airport into London City Airport, but I want to set my own map. So I'm going to click on Gatwick, set as departure. So you're just creating a flight plan basically. And London City, set as arrival. I don't just want to fly in a straight line. I want to fly over Twickenham Stadium first and come into London City this way. So I'm going to click on that point of interest and click add. So it flies from Gatwick over to Twickenham into London City Airport. Very simple flight plan. Let's go and fly this. And okay, so we're set up on our departure airport, runway rather, at Gatwick. Go down, just left click the heading knob, so when you turn the autopilot heading on, actually it's not going to matter in this case because we're going to use nav. I'm going to show you that in a moment. But it's just good habit, left click your heading knob so the autopilot heading is in the same heading as your heading currently. Let's go full throttle, take off, get up in the air first, and then I'll show you some magic. Really impressed by this cloud formation. I love the clouds in Flight Simulator 2020. Another video I must make at some point. Let's pull back gently, take off. Configure the aircraft, throttle back a little bit so we're not over stressing the engines. Level flight, slight climb. Gonna go down to my G1000. This time I'm gonna click autopilot and nav. Now the autopilot's turning us onto our course. Let's get the VFR map up here so you can see it clearer. That's our course we set in our flight plan. The autopilot is gonna follow that flight plan to the letter. It will take us round that whole flight plan. Just by clicking the autopilot computer on and clicking the nav button, which is here, it will follow that course. Isn't that magic? We still need to manually select what altitude we would like to be at. Let's get rid of that VFR map. Altitude of 2,000 feet would do. And a vertical speed of 300 feet per minute is fine. So it'll climb us to 2,000 feet at 300 feet per minute. Following, let's bring up that VFR map again, our flight plan we set up before. So when it gets to here, it will turn us and bring us towards London City Airport. So there's a little bit of magic for you. So we can let that continue on its merry way. Well listen, I'm going to leave it there. Those are just the basic. I don't want to overload people. Those are the basic autopilot and most frequent autopilot functions that you'll be using. Let me know if this has been useful to you. Do give me some feedback because it's useful to me to let me know if my videos are of use to people. I know some of you do already, but I do appreciate that. Give the video a like if it's been useful. As you can see, this is part 1. I'm definitely going to release another video of more advanced or other functions that you can do with the autopilot. Give the video a like if you liked it. Subscribe for more, obviously more of these videos coming out. And I'll see you soon.